Today, I want to look at this article on Compact Magazine. For those who don't know, Compact Magazine, I guess it was a magazine started by two religious conservatives and a Marxist, according to this article on New York Times. Started by two religious conservatives and a Marxist.
Spaghetti-o!
And it aims to challenge both a libertine left and a libertarian right. Anyway, this article is titled, "Which Side Are You On, DC?" was written by Senator Josh Hawley, published on December 5th, 2022. Josh Hawley starts, "The book of Deuteronomy instructs, 'You shall not oppress a hired worker.'" And already I gotta stop. Now, I don't have a problem with this message. I am opposed to oppression of anyone. I will just say I would be careful about invoking the book of Deuteronomy, more broadly the Bible, as a source for morality. If you look at the book of Deuteronomy, it forbids lending money at a profit, as you can see right here, which I find interesting because Josh Hawley, I guess according to Wikipedia, his dad was a banker. Although maybe Josh Hawley would be in favor of outlawing money lending at a profit. When you see his remarks, his attitude toward Wall Street. Going back to the book of Deuteronomy, I guess the book of Deuteronomy, I guess it condones shoplifting, saying if you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat some of the grapes. You may eat as many grapes as you want. But do not carry any away in a basket. So I guess shoplifting, according to the book of Deuteronomy, I guess shoplifting is totally fine so long as you make sure to consume your goods while you are on your neighbor's property. And then the Bible in general. I've been reading the Bible lately, doing it live on Twitch streams. A lot of crazy stuff in the Bible. This is a book that people like Dennis Prager, conservatives like Dennis Prager and Yoram Hazony want to bring back into the schools. I guess so kids can learn about Jacob having sex, marrying and having sex with not just one, but two of his cousins. And then after his cousins got jealous of each other, he ended up having sex with two of their slaves. So he ended up procreating with two of his cousins and two of their slaves. And that, kids, is how we got the tribes of Israel. I actually just got finished with the 10 Commandments recently, and I was surprised to find out that right after the 10 Commandments, God tells Moses how to properly treat a slave.
Spaghetti-o!
Before giving death penalties to what I would consider, what many might consider to be pretty light crimes, pretty light sins. Anyway, I'm just saying we should probably be careful with invoking the book of Deuteronomy and the Bible as a source for morality. But Hawley goes on to say, apparently, no one told President Biden or the rest of the political industrial complex. Last week, they united to stifle a potential strike by railway workers, the first one in years. It's too costly for the economy. It's too costly for the economy. The DC types moaned. The workers are being unreasonable. Keep this in mind. Hardly, says Hawley. The rail workers were merely asking for a handful of sick days, something the professional class regards as a matter of divine rights. Half of the House of Representatives still will not show up for work for fear of even potentially falling ill, but railroad workers must be forced to work and take sick days on their own dime. This hypocrisy is rank, but also revealing. The country's political class has very little regard for blue-collar work or the people who perform it. That needs to change. Standoffs like this are not very common anymore. For many in power now, the very idea of a rail strike sounds somewhat anachronistic. a throwback to the labor battles of the late 19th century. That's because the winners of our modern economy are not accustomed to thinking about where their consumer goods come from. And I'm going to stop right there because I do not think that this is the reason why we do not have rail strikes anymore. You know, when reading about this story for the last few months, this story started getting going in the middle of September, and I've read a variety of articles coming away confused. There's something like 8 out of the 12 railroad unions involved in this dispute have approved of some sort of deal, and that it's 4 of the other 12 unions that are holding up the deal. Meanwhile, there are 4 major railroad companies involved in these negotiations. And I'm over here wondering, why is Congress and the President of the United States getting involved in these labor disputes? Why is this a political issue? This sounds like a dispute between employers and employees. Well, as it turns out, we are not exactly operating on a free market in this area of the economy. This is according to an article published on CNN by Chris Isidore on December 2nd of 2022 titled, "How an Arcane 96-Year-Old Law Stopped the Rail Strike." According to this article, it talks about how under the Railway Labor Act, the federal agency that oversees railroad and airline labor relations is the National Mediation Board, which tries to bring together two sides, and it set up a series of limits and cooling off periods during which unions cannot strike and management cannot lock out the workers. And if all those efforts fail, then Congress can step in and impose a contract under which both sides will have to operate. In negotiations at other businesses, the workers' ability to strike is the most powerful option unions have to achieve their goals at the bargaining table. And even the railroads admit that the law makes strikes extremely unlikely. The goal of the Railway Labor Act was to reduce the likelihood of a work stoppage, said Ian Jeffries, the CEO of the Association of American Railroads, the trade group that represents the railroads. And it has been remarkably effective at doing that. I also read about this in an article on Newsweek that was put up also on December 5th, written by Chris Griswold, who heads a think tank, a right-wing think tank, and used to be a legislative staffer for Senator Marco Rubio. He wrote this op-ed in Newsweek titled, "Republicans, our future is not with free markets, it's with the working class."
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
Anyway, this piece, he talks about the strike, the disputes, and how I guess even people on the left are applauding senators like Marco Rubio for better standing up for workers than Joe Biden and the Democrats. But even in this piece, Chris Griswold mentions the Railway Labor Act, and I found this quote pretty telling down here. Chris Griswold says, "Still, as many commentators noted about the GOP's midterm disappointment, the party still has a long way to go to create and communicate a clear economic vision." And on here, I actually agree. Because when looking into a lot of these candidates from the Republican Party during the midterms, I came away thinking that none of these goofballs had any coherent economic strategy. Most of them just said, inflation bad, it's all the Democrats' fault, give me more power. Anyway, I think we might have a disagreement over what the economic vision should be, but he's right that Republicans lack any vision. But he goes on to say, American workers are intensely tired of getting, well, railroaded by libertarian economic ideology that treats them as cogs in the free market machine rather than human beings whose dignity, family lives, and communities matter. and they want an economic agenda that will do something about it. And a reason why I find this all amusing is because it sounds like he's trying to blame the free market for this labor dispute, when it's clearly not the free market. The whole reason why we're in this mess is because labor relations between railroads and unions has essentially been nationalized. Workers are not allowed to strike. Railroad companies are not allowed to lock out. And if there is not a deal worked out, then we will get Congress together to decide what's really fair for everyone. So again, it's not like we're operating on a free market. And you gotta wonder why a senator like Josh Hawley is not calling for a repeal of the 1926 Railway Labor Act. And my guess is, this is just speculation, but my guess is it's because that this law gives people like Josh Hawley more power and influence than he deserves. Power and influence that he can wield in the name of the working class or blue-collar workers. And even if Josh Hawley, even if he doesn't get everything he wants, even if he does not always win, at least Josh Hawley still has a seat at the table, so to speak. Think about it. Think about if you were, say, an aspiring athlete, like a basketball player. Would you rather be in the NBA on a losing team or not be in the NBA at all? And more broadly, again, this is just speculation. I'm guessing that Josh Hawley has a very low view of man, especially the blue-collar worker that he claims to care about. I'm guessing that he views workers as incapable of succeeding in a free society, incapable of negotiating on their own behalf, incapable of growing on their own behalf. No. The blue-collar workers of America, they need a hero like Josh Hawley to save them from greedy capitalists in a free market, or whatever's left of it. All this being said, if it's not clear already, I want to make something clear. I really don't have a dog in this muddy dogfight. I definitely don't like the Democrats who are and always have been the party of economic planning. I'm also not on the side of Republicans like Josh Hawley, who I think is clearly trying to make the Republican Party into another party of economic planning. And it's even hard for me to pick a side in this labor dispute because from what I can tell, both the workers and the railroad companies, they are both trying to negotiate with guns, with political pull. And I think what we need here is some deregulation, some freeing up in the economy in this area so that employers and workers can freely negotiate for mutual self-benefits. Yeah. Josh Hawley goes on to say, as Biden put it last week, 10 years ago, how many of you knew what the hell a supply chain was? The answer is everyone who works a production job. But thanks to services like Amazon Prime and Uber Eats, I think you can thank Amazon Prime for the growth of railroad. I know I've heard it said that Warren Buffett got interested in railroads and Berkshire Hathaway got invested in railroads over the last decade because he saw that shipping demand was going to go up thanks to companies like Amazon Prime. And I guess people questioned him when he made these moves. And now that he is a major shareholder of one of these railroads, I forget which one it is, now he's getting a lot of scrutiny and a lot of blame.
Blow it out your ass.
Anyway, Hawley says, America's professional managerial types inhabit a world where goods appear on their doorsteps as if by magic. Nor do these people spend much time considering the workers whose sweat and toil makes their lives possible, except when it comes to lecture them about their politics or to send reporters to gawk at them in the pages of the New York Times or the Washington Post. For those who stand at the pinnacle of our society and our economy, our society, our economy, America's blue-collar workforce has become increasingly invisible As it turns out, the rail workers had a good reason to threaten a strike. Right now in the United States, rail workers are not guaranteed paid sick days. They must use vacation time for any illness. And here's the best part. They must request that vacation time in advance. Of course, as anyone who has been sick knows, it's nearly impossible to forecast an illness before it happens. That's how the current standoff started. Railway workers wanted sufficient paid sick leave to cover illnesses. Keep this in mind. Josh Hawley is being clear about what this strike was really about, because he's going to make some convenient pivots. And the big companies did not want to provide them, despite the fact that rail companies are more profitable than ever.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
How have they gotten so profitable in the last few years? By cutting the number of rail jobs and working laborers harder. I've seen a lot of this talking point that railroads have cut railroad job to save some pennies. However, I found some articles that provide a different picture, paint a different picture, including this one from July of 2021. So over a year before these disputes really blew up. This was on the Wall Street Journal by Paul Ziabro, titled "Shortage of Railroad Workers Threatens Recovery. Struggle to Bring Crews Back Draws Scrutiny from Regulators Who Were Already Concerned About Lean Operations." And this article talks about how these large railroad companies like CSX, they've been trying to hire new workers. I guess they wanted to hire 500 new conductors, but have only managed to hire 200 so far. A lot of these companies are struggling to bring back their workers that they lost due to the pandemic and lockdowns. Right here, the article talks about how they've been trying to offer bonuses and incentives to get new workers, and they're really struggling to get the workers they lost to the pandemic back to work, so to speak. I also saw this article on Time Magazine that was put up in September of this year by Alania Samuels, titled "America's Railroads Are in Trouble with or Without a Strike." And even this article talks about how railroads are struggling to bring back and add new staff. I guess railroad employees, according to this article, the average compensation is $160,000 a year. But they've been trying to get people back to work. They've been trying to add new staff, including offering incentives of thousands of dollars in signing bonuses and whatnot. But they're just having a hard time filling this demand. So I'll let you guys decide whether or not railroad companies are cutting staff to save a few pennies, or whether or not they lost a lot of workers due to lockdowns and the pandemic and have struggled to bring them back. But Hawley goes on to say, the record profits of the rail industry have been a tremendous victory for Wall Street, not so much for workers. Remember, guys, it's Republicans like Josh Hawley who are here to save America from the socialists on the left. So let's assume that Josh Hawley got everything he wanted. Government-mandated wage increases in the form of paid sick days. We know that, like with tax increases and new taxes and minimum wage increases and other artificially imposed costs to doing business, that businesses will probably not tell their shareholders to just take a pay cut. What they're more likely to do is to pass these costs onto the consumer, which means more price inflation. Or they might try to automate or whatever, but what they are unlikely to do is to dip into their profits. This constant bitching and moaning over profits and record profits, whether it comes from the socialists on the left or the socialists on the right, like Josh Hawley, it's all a lame-ass attempt to demonize people for the sin of being selfish. And if you don't believe me, just wait until we get to the end of this article. Or you can watch a video I made earlier this year where I talk about how people like Robert Reich and Cenk Uygur were freaking out about large corporations raising their prices so that they could raise wages to compete for labor on the tightened labor market, which I think is also affecting the railroads. Because despite giving workers raises, which is what these people claim they want, they were still mad and upset and bent out of shape because these companies were still making record profits. This is what happens when you have a mixed economy, where the government gets involved in managing the economy on behalf of the will of the people, or the general welfare. I noticed this with Adam Conover's new show. He kept running into this dilemma on his Netflix show, The G Word, which some of you have requested that I look at. It's a pretty dumb show, but I remember he ran into this dilemma when talking about farm subsidies and how farm subsidies really came about during the Great Depression. He was talking about how during the Great Depression, 1/4 of Americans lived on farms, so it made sense to subsidize farms because they were struggling. But on the other hand, subsidies mean that taxpayers will have to pay more in taxes. Adam Conover even talked about how subsidies will often provide perverse incentives that will eventually have a negative impact for consumers. And he kept having this dilemma of, well, when considering the will of the people, how do you balance the interests of the consumer and the taxpayer and the farmer? And I'm over here thinking, here's a brilliant idea, Brainiac. How about we just let people freely trade with one another for mutual self-benefits? And you see this with the whole railway dispute. On one hand, you could say that blue-collar workers in the railroad industry, they clearly want better benefits. On the other hand, going back to the beginning, Joe Biden, he justified this deal by saying the economy's at stake and there are a lot more jobs at stake and a lot of blue-collar jobs. Middle-class Americans will suffer if the railroads come to a stop for a significant amount of time. Meanwhile, what about the corporations and their shareholders? I know that profit seekers will be the first to be ignored or thrown into a gulag when it comes to making decisions on behalf of the general welfare, which Hawley clearly wants to do here. You're going to see that Josh Hawley eventually mentions the Fortune 500. Meanwhile, I'm sure a lot of working class Americans have retirement accounts in Fortune 500 companies, including railroad companies, including Berkshire Hathaway. And a lot of these working class Americans, they're probably counting on these companies to continue making profits so that they can eventually retire with comfort. The point I'm making is that when you have this perpetual state of pressure group warfare in the lobby system, it's impossible. It's impossible to benefit one group of the so-called working class without making other members of the working class suffer. Anyway, Hawley goes on to say, and when those same workers had the temerity to reject the compromise Biden, management, and union bosses reached, largely by ignoring them, the most powerful institutions in American society promptly lined up to shut them out. Management, the White House, Nancy Pelosi and her cadre of House Democrats, and of course, the Senate with the help of too many Republicans. Together, they used the full force of the federal government to cram down the very contracts the workers voted against right back down their throats. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I say if you want less of this, you as a senator, Josh, should probably think about calling for a repeal of stuff like the Railway Labor Act so that workers have more power to, say, go on strikes and negotiate for wages on their own behalf, and they don't get contracts forced on them by the federal government. Again, we're not exactly operating on a free market in this scenario. No member of Congress or White House bureaucrat would ever have accepted this bad bargain, to say nothing for the Fortune 500. See what I'm talking about? That dastardly Fortune 500. Where white-collar employees just spent the last 2 years working remote. Many of them are still at it, and yet somehow Biden and lawmakers decided even a few sick days for railway workers was a bridge too far. Which raises the question, do we want blue-collar work in this country or not? Well, what I want is a free market. Speaking of which, Scott Lincecum just wrote a piece. You want to talk about what's best for the workers? Scott Lincecum just wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal the other day titled, America's Workers Need Freedom, Not More Government.
You're goddamn right.
Saying subsidies, tariffs, and excessive regulations inhibit living standards more than they raise them. So I say if you want to help the working class, the way to do it is by freeing up the economy. Take some points from Scott Lincecum. But notice what Josh Hawley is doing here. And I have noted this about Tucker Carl Markson many times. I think what Josh Hawley is doing is he's reframing the Marxist narrative on class warfare from the perspective of an American religious conservative. Josh Hawley, he claims to be looking out for the American working man, the blue-collar worker. And what's keeping the blue-collar working down? Well, it's the greedy corporations, it's Wall Street, it's elitist establishment Democrat politicians. They're all conspiring to keep the working man down. And whenever I point this stuff out, I'm often met with excuses like, well, at least they're not on the left.
What are you, on the left?
Really? When reading this shit, when it comes to economics, what big difference is there between Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders? I'm starting to sense that many of the alleged anti-socialist, anti-leftist types on the right, many of these people would probably embrace a Hugo Chavez or a Fidel Castro, so long as they wipe their ass with a rainbow flag as they're speaking about
Class warfare.
The reason anti-worker attitudes are so prevalent among the powerful is simple. Yeah, it's the powerful. It's the workers versus the powerful. More and more of our leaders embrace the idea that blue-collar labor is inherently low status, even embarrassing. Today's professional and political classes want everyone to look and act like them. Go to expensive college. Keep in mind, this is a guy that went to prestigious universities like Stanford and Yale. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but go to expensive college, take on 5 or 6 figures in debt. And yeah, why is college so expensive to the point where people are taking out massive student loans? It's because of government intervention in student loans and secondary education. I don't see Josh Hawley calling for reform in this area. I don't see him calling for a repeal of the Higher Education Act, which started this madness. No, I'm sure he'll get around to it after he's done trying to shake down Disney for being too woke. Get married late, defer having children or don't have them at all, and work an office job, be a good little consumer, and do not cause a scene. And this formula has indeed worked for a sliver of the population. Meanwhile, real wages for most Americans are falling. Really? Again, this is stuff we typically hear from Robert Reich and Bernie Sanders types, when the truth is, real wages have actually risen for the last few decades. Now, there is a problem with cost of living, as I noted with secondary education, also with housing and healthcare, areas where the federal government is heavily involved. So again, if you want to help out the working class, Josh, take some points from Mr. Lincecum over here. Fewer Americans are getting married, few still having families, and millions of able-bodied men are out of the workforce. Wall Street and Washington say this anti-worker agenda is the natural order of things. They are wrong as usual. We do not have to follow this path, and we should not a moment longer. In a sense, I agree with them, but again, I think we have different visions on where to go after leaving this path. Standing up for workers is a profoundly conservative cause. If conservatives care about protecting families, they should fight to see blue-collar workers paid enough to support a family on a single income. I think this is another interesting pivot because he started this talking about the railway dispute, which he was right. It was mostly about paid sick days. But he's conveniently leaving out that the New Deal does seem to give them generous pay increases. At least according to this article on the New York Times, the agreement also gives union members an immediate 14% raise with back pay dating back to 2020. It also includes raises totaling 24% during the 5-year life of the contract that runs from 2020 to 2024. It also gives them cash bonuses of $1,000 a year for a 5-year life of the contract. So maybe Hawley does have a point. Maybe some people are struggling. People in the middle class might be struggling, although I think it has more to do with cost of living rather than wages. But it's clearly not an issue with the railway dispute that he led off with. They should also fight to see that those same workers are financially backstopped when they get sick or hurt. If conservatives are about stopping woke capital, they should support American workers at the bargaining table, not undermine them at the first opportunity. Where'd this business about woke capital come from? From what I can tell, it was not an issue during the labor dispute. I find this interesting, that his hyper-focus on woke capital. Again, this was his justification for reforming copyright laws. He specifically wanted to target Disney for being too woke. A lot of people said, well, you know, the copyright laws could use some reform. Fine. If that's your reason, if you think copyright laws extend too long, then fine. But that was not the reason Josh Hawley proposed reform. He was specifically going after woke capital. Thanks for fighting for the middle class, Josh. There is a reason the woke capitalists eagerly ship jobs to China and elsewhere overseas. Notice how slippery he got there. As I always say, protectionist types, anti-international trade types, they always start with China, 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 because China is an easy target when talking about this. And then in practice, they often impose tariffs and restrictions on freer and friendlier countries.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
This is also an issue that Scott Linscomb talked about in his article that I mentioned earlier. Talks about how even worse, many of these same policymakers offer pro-worker policies such as steel tariffs that harms most of the workforce. As of 2018, workers in U.S. steel consuming industries outnumbered steel workers by a factor as great as 80 to 1. Way to go, guys. Hope you guys are proud of all those Trump-era steel tariffs that even the Biden administration is maintaining.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Hawley goes on to say they do not want to pay them American wages or give them any say over the direction of American companies. So what? Josh Hawley's one of these workplace democracy dorks like Richard Wolff? Give them a say in the direction of their company? Whatever. But that should be exactly what conservatives want.
Blow it out your ass.
The only way to solve the problem of corporate wokeness long term. So is this about the working class, or is it about fighting people on Josh Hawley's enemies list? The only way to solve the problem of corporate wokeness long term is to make the liberal C-suite accountable to God-fearing, patriotic American workers. Why the God-fearing part? So what? Does Josh Hawley support for blue-collar workers? Is it only applicable if they're God-fearing?
Really makes you think.
What about secular workers, atheist workers, Scientologist workers, pagan workers? No. I guess they only get Josh Hawley's attention and sympathy if they're God-fearing, patriotic American workers. And if conservatives care about healthy towns and schools and churches, as they always say they do, they should support the kind of work and wages that nourish those institutions and make life possible. You shall give the worker his wages, Deuteronomy warns, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin. Well, if that's the case, Josh, why not leave it to God to judge these people who are exploiting these workers? Sin. There is an old-fashioned word. For conservatives, it ought to be a reminder that winning a better deal for America's workers, remember, just God-fearing, patriotic American workers, winning a better deal for America's workers is not just an electoral imperative, it's a moral imperative. The question now is whether we will take that duty seriously. Yeah, guys, it's a moral imperative, according to Josh Hawley. Don't make me tap the sign. As an aside, I noticed last week a lot of people on the right were applauding, going crazy over this viral clip of Tom Cotton. This clip came after Tom Cotton was grilling the Kroger CEO, because I guess Kroger had this policy of having employees wear aprons with rainbow hearts on them to celebrate Pride Month. And after that, Tom Cotton said, like, yeah, look, you woke corporations. You always come to us free market leaning Republicans for help whenever Democrats want to shake you down, regulate your business, or destroy your business. So from now on, next time that happens, I'm just going to say, sorry that's happening to you. Best of luck. And I'm over here wondering, is this where we want to go? Selective enforcement of private property rights based on political leanings? I can imagine a scenario where, say, Elon Musk, who's being held up as a hero by the likes of even Josh Hawley for buying Twitter and making changes. I can imagine a scenario where Democrats come after Elon Musk, try to heavily regulate, if not destroy, Twitter. I think they're already doing it with the FTC. I can imagine where Elon Musk has to come to the Senate to look for help. And someone like a Tom Cotton looking at him and saying, well, Mr. Musk, I would like to help you, but I see here that one of your companies, Tesla Motors, they have a history of loudly and proudly announcing that they're going to be paying for women's abortions, paying for women's travel costs to get abortions if they live in a state where there are abortion restrictions. That's a little too woke for me, so I'm sorry that's happening to you. Best of luck.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Again, is this the road we want to go down? I don't think selectively enforcing private property rights is the road we want to go down. And I get the frustration toward woke business executives, if at the very least clueless and cowardly business executives who may just go along with it. But I do not think that selectively enforcing private property rights is the solution. It's probably just going to make things worse. Anyway.